Well, British voters go to the polls 2 weeks from tomorrow to decide whether the UK should pull out of the European Union. I caught up with Maclean's correspondent Jonathon Gatehouse to talk about the implications of a potential Brexit. Jonathon, Brexit, it's serious business coming up the end of this month.
It is, absolutely. You know, the referendum, the in and out referendum on the 23rd of June about the UK's future participation in the European Union, it's been for months, almost too close to call, but now all of a sudden the Leave side seems to be pulling out in front. They've got a 5-point advantage in the polls.
What does that mean? I mean, if they do leave, or can they even leave, I guess?
Well, it's got to be a negotiated departure, and it's unprecedented, really. I mean, you've had other countries refuse to join or stop at similar or different stages, but I mean, pulling out, it could take a decade. There are all sorts of apocalyptic predictions of what it could do to the British economy in terms of a recession or a huge spike in mortgage rates, job losses, but no one really knows for sure.
And so what are the exit people doing to push this, that they suddenly open up this leave? What have they been telling people?
Well, really, it seems like the principal fear for people of staying in the EU is migration, and specifically the kind of problems you've seen on the continent over the last year with not just refugees, but people from within the EU. In the UK, they've had over 3 million people from the EU move to the UK since they opened up the borders in 2004. And now there's a lot of pressure on housing, the health system, social services, and people have sort of come to believe that this is the fault of the EU.
Has there not been an equal amount of people leaving Britain and going to the EU?
No, its net migration has been higher in than out, and that's principally because the UK's economy has done a lot better than other places on the continent. It has, because the UK isn't part of the Eurozone, still has the pound, not the euro, that hasn't had the same sort of disruption from the problems in Greece and Italy and other places.
And what are the people who are trying to convince them to stay, what are they selling people on?
Well, really, it's been a very negative campaign. People are calling David Cameron's Remain side Project Fear. It's really been all about warnings from the IMF and the WTO and the OECD, as well as Mark Carney, the Canadian who heads up the Bank of England, that this is going to be an unprecedented leap off a cliff, and that no one knows how bad it's going to be.
Is this comparable to Quebec in Canada? Could you call it the same thing?
It's the sense of a referendum campaign. Of course, the UK went through that a year ago with the Scottish independence referendum, but it's different because you're not talking about identity or national pride. You're really trying to sell the people of the UK of giving away some of that identity and some of that control over their own destiny to this European project, and that's it's a much harder thing to convince people of.
And they've never really been happy with it, have they?
No, I mean, it's been a controversial thing since 1973 when they first joined the European market, and it's really changed over the years. That's what a lot of people who want to leave will tell you, that it started out as an economic free trade deal, and now it's a political one. And all sorts of complaints about bureaucracy and waste in Brussels, as well as things like maybe a European army and these fears of the future. But it's really hard to tell how it's going to go.
And you say this could take up to, if they do say yes to leave, this could take up to a decade. Would other countries follow?
That's the great fear, right? Is that if the UK goes, it's one of the principal members of the European Union, that others will follow. I mean, the UK is putting in more money than it's getting out of the EU, and it would be much harder to keep big countries in, especially those who are paying the bills.
And what about if they vote to stay? Will this be something maybe force them to rethink the EU and how it's handled?
Well, Cameron went to the EU in the run-up to this campaign and negotiated what he says is a much better deal for Britain. It has now more control over immigration, more of an ability to opt out of certain programs. But it's hard to see them getting a better deal if they vote to leave. I think in the end it'll just be this long and complicated mess as everyone tries to figure out how to divorce amicably.
And that's coming up in 2 weeks, right?
June 23rd is the vote.
All right, Jonathon, thanks very much for talking to us today.
You're welcome.
You can read Jonathon's full article in the latest edition of Maclean's magazine. It hits newsstands tomorrow morning. Check it out tonight on the Texture by Next Issue app.